Episode 74, Cryptocurrency and Smart Contracts with Amy Wan. Take it away, Patrick.
Hey everyone, we're here with Amy, the CEO of SageWise, and we're glad to have you here of what is obviously a much discussed topic of the day. With anything dealing with cryptocurrency seems to make people excited, and increasingly more peers and random people we meet tend to want to perk up and involve themselves in any conversation involving that, mostly because I think they're going to get rich. But anyways, so Amy, why don't you take a second to introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing?
Sure. So thanks so much for having me on the show, guys. My name is Amy Wan. I am founder and CEO of SageWise, which is a dispute resolution infrastructure for smart contracts. My background is actually, I'm an attorney by training. So I started my career off in the federal government doing international affairs, international regulatory and trade type issues. When I moved from DC back to California, there were obviously no free trade agreements to negotiate out here in California. And so, kind of had to start my career all over again. Was basically general counsel and employee number one of an early stage real estate crowdfunding startup. And then from there, I went to become partner at a boutique securities law firm and got to a point in my career really where I just couldn't imagine practicing law the same way for, the next 30, 40 years. So I actually left my partnership at my law firm and started this company. And the original purpose of this company was really to automate my job as an attorney. So that's what I did. I pushed out software that would automate the drafting of small, real estate funds, real estate private equity funds, crowdfunding syndication funds. But basically last year, I started getting a lot of calls from people who wanted to do an ICO. An ICO is an initial coin offering. And so I looked into the space and, more than, I basically looked into the space and I thought there was something fundamentally wrong with the space, right? If you were watching this entire space last summer, you would basically see ICOs come out, and in the first 15 minutes, they would get hacked $2 to $3 million, and the founders would sit there and shrug their shoulders and say, oops, sorry, there's nothing we can do. I thought, gosh, this is really strange. In the real world, when you lose $2 to $3 million, you get slapped with a lawsuit. And so I started digging into why and basically realized that smart contracts are, in many cases, not actually very smart. In fact, they're incredibly stupid, which is why we're doing what we're doing now. We're basically building an infrastructure or a layer for dispute resolution in case smart contracts fail.
So that was obviously like a lot of stuff. So kind of taking it back a step, can you sort of give a high level overview? When we say cryptocurrency, blockchain, and kind of especially why people might just shrug their shoulders and sort of give up, things like decentralized immutability. Can you sort of give us like a brief overview of kind of what those things are supposed to mean, and then, kind of why you find that they aren't always what people assume?
Yeah, sure. So blockchain, if you're going to define blockchain, I think we really also need to sit here and define what a distributed ledger is, right? So think about, your bank account, for example. You kind of have a ledger there or an accounting of all the transactions you've had, but it's centralized. Either you or your accountant or someone has one copy of this, and if that copy is wrong or if that copy is forged or fraudulent, then there's obviously going to be a problem. Blockchain is the technology that kind of underlies all this cryptocurrency stuff that everyone's talking about, and what it really is it's meant to be a trustless system, right? And I say trustless and it's also decentralized because it basically works like this. Instead of one person having one copy of a ledger, Instead, think of it as maybe we've got this whole network of people, right? And every time a transaction happens, that transaction gets recorded to the ledger, but it doesn't get recorded to one ledger. It gets recorded to everyone's ledger at the same time, and the ledgers are always syncing, right? And so there's not one person with a right or wrong copy. Everyone has the same copy, and it can't really be forged because everyone's copy is the same. So that's basically the premise of blockchain distributed ledger technology. Now, cryptocurrency is one use case of blockchain, and you can really have many different use cases. I think cryptocurrency is just one of the more popular ones because basically, back in, I think, what was it, 2008, 2009, an anonymous person, everyone calls them Satoshi, basically came out with this white paper that introduced this technology, and the way they introduced it was through a cryptocurrency, and that cryptocurrency, as everyone knows today, is Bitcoin, right? And so this anonymous person put this thing out into the world, and slowly, it began to gain adoption. But then when people were reading about it, they're like, well, I'm going to make my own cryptocurrency. And so that's why you have these things called altcoins, alternative coins, right? So, you not only have Bitcoin today, you've got things like Dogecoin and all these other coins. So there's a lot of different types of cryptocurrencies.
So, sorry to interrupt. So
yeah.
one thing, this is one thing I've always kind of wondered is, going back to the blockchain, what's to stop me and some of my friends, or maybe I make a post on Facebook and I get everyone who's following me on Facebook. What's to stop all of us from getting together, maybe me and 100 people, and saying, Amy Wan gave me all of her money? Or if all of us, somehow said that and agreed to that, the 100 of us, what's to stop that from being reality? In other words, who's watching the Watchmen, or who are the Watchmen, I guess? What's to stop, a group of people from just saying something happened when it really didn't?
So, right now we're talking about public blockchains as opposed to private ones. And I can talk about private ones in a little bit, but public ones are basically, it's exactly as it sounds. It's out in the public, and everyone who's in this network has a copy of this ledger, and it's continually syncing, right? You might not know who is who are the other 9 parties or 900 parties or 9,000 parties that have this ledger, which makes it very difficult to basically create some sort of fraudulent transaction on the blockchain. Now, there are private blockchains. So there's a lot of Fortune 500 companies and things of that sort that are more so looking to private blockchains. The reason why they're specifically interested in private blockchains is because you still do have a little bit more of a degree of control, right? And so if there truly is a mistake, there actually is a way to go back and edit it a little bit more.
I think the other thing, Jason, is what you find is partly the big criticism in the public news that has come up with Bitcoin about mining is because of that. So the idea is that you have to do a bunch of work in order to kind of commit a transaction to the chain. And so in order to kind of rewrite history, you would need more than 51% of that capacity in order to form a majority. And if you were going to do that, you have 2 problems. One, it's very expensive to do that. And the second thing is now you've sort of undermined the integrity of the very thing you're trying to steal. So you've spent all this money to commit this fraud, but at the same time, you now hold Bitcoins that you stole from Amy that are worth less because you crashed the market because everyone goes, oh, now we got hacked.
Oh, I see.
So, and then there's other ways of sort of like proof of stake you'll hear about or whatever that I think are trying to solve the same problem. But it basically amounts to people having to spend resources to alter something where then they actually undermine their own work in doing so.
I see. So, got it. That makes sense. Yeah. So for me to pretend like Amy sent me all of her money, I need to sort of reverse engineer her private key. And that would take so much effort that if someone could do that, then the whole thing kind of falls apart.
Well, the difficulty, I think, aside from the resources issue, is, you would have to attempt to go and change everyone else's record or transactional history, that ledger, right? And that is so difficult. I mean, there have been instances in which this has been done before. So, for example, every time they hard fork Ethereum, right? Ethereum is a very popular blockchain or protocol. They've done it in the past, very rarely, very sparingly, but when they have done it, it was to fix a big thing that was not meant to happen.
Got it. Makes sense.
And so, yeah, that's a good point. So you were talking first about, cryptocurrency, but then smart contracts. How do smart contracts differ from cryptocurrency?
Right. So smart contracts are just a completely separate or different tool, right? A smart contract is basically, I would say it's like an English contract, except written in code. So I once heard someone say, like, they thought the name of it was not great. They would rather call it programmable contracts. And I would tend to agree. A smart contract is really nothing more than a set of if-then clauses, right? And so a smart contract is meant to be self-executing and immutable. So if you and I entered a smart contract to say, hey, the Raiders, let's bet one Bitcoin on who's going to win the Raiders versus whatever game. And if the Raiders win, you get the Bitcoin. If the other team wins, I get the Bitcoin, right? And so when the Raiders play, there's going to be some certain outcome, and the smart contract would automatically know, okay, the Raiders won, so you get the Bitcoin. It's just a set of if-then clauses, really.
I see. So the smart contracts somehow has some interface to some other phenomena in the world, like there's maybe the NFL has an API or something like that, and the smart contract has an interface to that, and as soon as that updates, the smart contract fires.
Yeah. I mean, that's one way you could do it. So there are these there's a bunch of different things, actually. So one concept is that of an oracle. An oracle is some sort of, third party that verifies some sort of facts. So you could go to an oracle and use that to see whether the Raiders won. At the same time, you can use nodes, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but that's, I'm highly simplifying all of this, but that's basically it in a nutshell. I think one way you might be able to think of a smart contract that really kind of is in the real world today is, when you go and you trade stocks and you say, hey, when ABC stock goes above $20, I want to sell it or something like that, right? And so the minute it goes above $20, it automatically executes.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So you said, you kind of think the smart contracts are often dumb, or, that they're just programmable things. And I think that makes sense that, like you said, they're just a program. They're just doing what they're being programmed to do. But what do you kind of find as like a misconception around this sort of, I don't know if it's serious or not, but the, internet's view that, oh, we won't need lawyers anymore because the contract is code and the code is the contract?
Yeah, so there's definitely philosophy that code is law, right? But I think if you've seen what's happened over the past 2 years, there's a lot of problems with that philosophy. And so I think the first big example of this was the DAO. The DAO was the Decentralized Autonomous Organization. It was basically a decentralized fund, right? People pooled money together, and then they were all supposed to vote about, hey, let's fund this project, or no, let's fund this project. And the rules of the community were all written in code in a gigantic smart contract. Except the problem was that the smart contract, I guess just wasn't really well written. And so one community member went in and saw a security vulnerability in the code. And so they basically executed a hack against the smart contract. Now, it wasn't against the terms of the smart contract, but it was certainly against the intent of the smart contract. And the result of that was basically that the DAO got drained of $50-60 million worth of funds at the time. And in order to, prevent the hacker from getting away with this, they had to go hard fork Ethereum. So, that happened in 2016. $50-60 million was lost in, or almost lost in that transaction had they not reversed it or hard forked it. 2017 got even worse, right? I recently saw a statistic that the equivalent value of $1 billion US dollars was lost in smart contracts in 2017. Lots of ICOs got hacked, right? And so what you're starting to see is that smart contracts, in fact, maybe this whole immutability thing is not such a good thing, right? You've got coding errors, for example. Developers often are like, fail fast and iterate. But if that's what you're doing with a smart contract, then a lot of smart contracts are going to fail from sloppy coding. Then you've got, security vulnerabilities. A lot of people today using smart contracts, they will go get a security audit on the smart contract, but that only will detect the presence of vulnerabilities. It won't necessarily detect or guarantee the absence of them, right? And then the third thing really is that the more complex people are writing their smart contracts to be, the more people are going to need to modify, amend, or terminate these smart contracts, because guess what? The world is, it's not just a yes, no, black and white place. It's actually really complex. Things happen, situations change, right? And so, having been an attorney who's dealt with a lot of contracts, dealt with a lot of disputes, you see a lot of different things, right? And so that's really the problem that we see today with smart contracts.
So, I've always kind of wondered, which is, you see someone will post up that they're, exploring using smart contracts for escrow for real estate. So, I mean, kind of like, do you have any thoughts on that? It's a good idea, bad idea. That seems awesome. I don't know, whatever. But also, like, how does it end up interfacing? Because obviously the, U.S. law or the state law or whatever applicable law might be, I'm using the wrong terms, you can correct them, it doesn't have in there what to do in case of problems in a smart contract for escrow of real estate. Like, how does the current actual law of the land interface with this new way of trying to do stuff?
Sure. So the interesting thing about smart contracts, as you say, is it can house assets, right? It can house tokens or cryptocurrency or whatever, right? And so a smart contract, in some ways, you can think of it like an escrow, except it's supposed to be self-executing. It's not centralized, right? If you go to a traditional escrow company that's highly centralized, it's run by human beings at the end of the day. So in some ways, a smart contract can act as escrow. Now, with regard to applying it in the real estate space, I actually get a lot of calls from folks who are like, oh, we want to do some sort of real estate ICO, something with the real estate and smart contracts and blockchain, blah, blah, blah. A lot of these times, I think a lot of people either don't really know what blockchain or smart contracts do, or they don't really understand real estate. I think a lot of, you certainly can use a smart contract to escrow those funds, but at the same time, the reason why real estate transactions take such a long amount of time isn't necessarily because of escrow, it's because of all the due diligence that needs to be done, right? You got to walk through the house. You got to make sure environmentally it's fine. There's no damage. You have to go get real estate title. You have to get title insurance, all these things. So, I think to say that, escrowing funds for real estate transactions in smart contracts will cure all our problems and make real estate transactions go so much faster. I think that's a little bit of an oversimplification. And again, I'm speaking from a perspective of how real estate transactions work in the United States. Now, with respect to, it doesn't necessarily work the same in all countries across the globe, right? And so that brings me to my next point, which is in terms of how the law treats it. Right now, we are at the very beginning stages of this entire industry, and I don't think the legal system has really caught up and has really contemplated how they're going to treat smart contracts or, digital transactions. I mean, we now have the e-Sign Act, which, basically allows for e-signatures. That took a while. It's going to take a while for the law to catch up with all the stuff around blockchain and smart contracts, right? Delaware, I would say, is actually one jurisdiction that is really ahead of the curve. They recently approved a law that allows for corporations to, basically be on the blockchain, if you will. So they're thinking a lot ahead. And then there's certainly other countries across the world that are really starting to look into this. But you're right, it is a pretty complex issue.
So maybe this will dovetail into the dispute resolution stuff you mentioned. But the thing that I've always tried to sort of get my head around is, so I guess to explain kind of, and I'll do my job, I'll try it, and I'll probably do a bad job and you can fix it. But so escrow, what that sort of means is like if you go to buy a house, that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have to do a lot of work to kind of allow house buying to happen. And so until the transaction is complete, the person who wants to buy the house essentially puts some money away in the hands of a kind of third party, an escrow, someone who holds the escrow account. You put the money there in this escrow account. And once the money's there, you kind of no longer have access to it as the person buying the property, but the person who you're buying from also doesn't have access to it. And then everyone goes through this sort of, I guess you would call it like good faith effort of trying to make the sale happen. And then at the end, ideally, everyone agrees that, yay, we're ready. And the escrow money gets transferred to some set of parties, but basically to the person who is selling the thing from the person who's buying it. And the reason why you might want an escrow account there is that while those real world things are happening, you know that the money's not going to go away or disappear. But for me, the other thing that I've always tried to figure out is if you kind of do this with the smart contract, like, I send some Ethereum to a contract, and until both Jason and I use our private keys to make some transaction that says the money should be released, it gets held there. But the problem is, like, what happens when we have a disagreement? So normally, as far as I understand it, the person holding the escrow would be responsible for taking a first pass at trying to, figure out what should happen to the money that's in the escrow account. But in terms of a smart contract, it never made sense to me. Like, you kind of do want a human there to sort of interface with the, attorneys, the law, the kind of thing that would happen when Jason and I have a dispute about what actually happened while we were trying to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I really couldn't have explained it better myself, right? And so, as much as I think there's definitely technologists out there who are like, oh, everything should be immutable, everything should be self-executing, we shouldn't have human beings involved. The truth is the world is a very complex place, and I will let you know that, human beings are very complex, creative creatures.
Surprise!
Right? And so, I mean, you would not believe the things I have seen in my career. Like, yeah, people are very, very creative in trying to get out of these things. And so that's why you will have situations, I think, where dispute resolution really is necessary for all of those edge cases where, things just aren't black and white.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that tying this into an episode we did earlier where I talked about now, like the latest in AI for games and things like that is basically predicting what your opponent wants. It turns out this is revolutionizing AI. It's also revolutionizing economics, things like that. And basically, people used to say, "Oh, let's find the Nash equilibrium," or "Let's get the perfect auction," and all of these things. And it's kind of similar to what you were saying, that people felt like there was this like pure solution. What people are finding now is no, like the price of things is based on psychology to a large degree, and the way people behave in auctions is not, as John Nash would have wanted. And so what really matters is modeling the people involved and knowing sort of what their value is, whether that's rational or not, and then working within the confines of that. So if we're in an auction situation, it's playing the best response to the other people, whatever auction strategy they're doing. And so in the case of like a real estate dispute, you have two people or maybe even more people who have different sets of values, and you have to take those sets of values into account when you're rationalizing this dispute. And I think those values are very hard to codify because it involves sort of a lot of common sense reasoning and human nature and these kind of things that you're not going to write in a smart contract.
I mean, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The way I explain these things to technologists is, look, we've been trying for millennia to figure out what justice and what fairness is, right? And if it were truly as simple as a little bit of game theory and a couple of algorithms, then, we would have figured this out a long time ago. You wouldn't have, philosophers since the time of Plato writing about, what are the theories and principles of justice, because you could all just distill it down to math. But, like I said, things are not that simple.
Yeah. I mean, I think exactly. as a technologist trying to, you sort of hear like the legal code. Maybe, I don't know if it's just the word code that like throws us off. But I remember, when in sort of school taking a class about law and always, having these people who were, so I took it with mostly people who were in the CS department, and everyone was always trying to figure out like, what's the little loophole to the law? Like, oh, you're not allowed to scalp tickets because, it's against the terms of service of the thing. But if I sell you a pencil for a very large sum of money and give you a ticket with it, to a concert, like that would be okay. And all these like, crafty things, because in code, that's what we do. Like, oh, if I, oversize this buffer, I can cause a buffer overflow here. Or if I, my code is breaking here because there's this one corner case. And so I feel like as a programmer, at least, I try to think of like, what are the kind of cutesy loopholes I could find in the law that would like, oh yeah, this is totally legal now. But I think it was interesting to me to kind of hear like the frustration from the lawyer who was teaching the class being like, that's not how this works. That there is a lot about intent and stuff that has to go before a jury or a judge, and they use their discretion about what you were trying to and what the law, not what the law just says in terms of actual English, right, which isn't perfect, but like, what does it actually mean?
Right. And that's what we call the spirit of the contract, right? You're really looking at intent, not just exactly what the contract says, right? And that, going back, that's basically exactly what happened to the DAO. The hacker violated the spirit of the contract, the intent of the contract, but not necessarily the terms of the contract. So, yeah.
That makes sense.
So, I mean, it is interesting to look at. Oh, sorry. What I was going to say, so interestingly, the kind of whatever psychology of the situation is somewhat played out, though, with specifically the DAO. So there's Ethereum, that sort of symboled by the ETH. But at the time of the hard fork, some people didn't agree that the funds should be reversed. And so they kept the course where those funds are still stolen, and in the, presumably that person's, I don't know, I think they've never tried to withdraw the money, but in theory they could. And so there is a parallel or forked version of the Ethereum blockchain where those transactions were never undone, were never sort of rolled back and fixed. And that's this ETC, the Ethereum Classic. And so there's actually, you can live in either version of the world you want to, but taking price as a stand-in for what people and popularity of which people voted for, the price of an Ethereum token today is like, I don't know what it is right now, but like $1,000. And I think Ethereum Classic token is like $30. So it's interesting that despite the fact that you would say the vibe of the internet at large is probably that we want these immutable blockchain, crypto, decentralized, all of the, stuff, that when the push came to shove and it was their money that got stolen, they actually voted to sort of kind of undo the immutability. And that's proven out by which one's valued at what today.
It's so funny, right? Like, people have all these concepts and these high-level philosophical ideals, but when they lose money, they get angry, and all the sense and all the pragmatism comes rolling right back in. But you're right. Like, if you do look at the DAO as an example, right? Up until that time, everyone was like, code is law. Whatever the smart contract says is law. But then this hacker comes in and does something no one expects that isn't technically against the code. It's not technically against the law, but it's against it was against the community's expectations, right? And so, yes, you have, obviously these hardcore people are like, oh, code is law. And then you have all these people who are suddenly like, no, we got to run to the police.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really funny to kind of just witness how the discussion went down.
Yeah, the anarchists suddenly were calling for government intervention. Yeah, it was kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, well, what police are you going to call? Like, what police understand what's going on, right?
I feel like, this idea that this person's just a total anarchist, and then at the moment there's like a hint of violence, they're calling 911. That's been kind of like a motif for the whole 2017.
Yeah, so I'll say that the crypto blockchain space is really interesting because, it's not just the technology. It comes with so much underpinning, right? Like, oh, you got to be decentralized. Oh, you got to do this. There's, definitely like anti-government, anarchist tendencies. And so I think when one is thinking about an ICO or when one works in this space, one also needs to sit there and think about, well, how is the community going to react to this? It's definitely a very interesting space to be in.
One question to kind of circle back a bit. So we talked a little bit about ICOs, and can you kind of describe what that is? Like in other words, how did even Bitcoin might be a special case, I guess, because it was so early, but just how did these coins start? Like what does that mean? Like, is it creating something out of nothing? Like how, kind of, how does that actually work?
Yeah. It kind of is. I mean, Bitcoin was, someone published a bunch of code out there. They put it out there. It was accompanied by a white paper that, described why they were doing this and how it worked. And slowly people just started mining and adopting it. And with all the other coins, people were like, well, why do I have to mine or buy Bitcoin? I'm going to create my own different types of coins. Those are altcoins. And then you kind of had Ethereum come along. The interesting thing about Ethereum is even though there is like a payment transactional value aspect to it, the special case of Ethereum is it's really a protocol in which you can build other things, right? So you see all these applications being built on top of Ethereum, which actually increases the value of Ethereum. Most smart contracts today, for example, are done on Ethereum. Now, ICOs aren't really coins, and we're getting into semantics here, but they're not really coins. They're more so tokens, right? And so, part of the reason why this space evolved is because people wanted to, for example, go out there and do these interesting decentralized projects, right? Maybe they wanted to create a decentralized internet or do this or do that. And those types of projects, to the extent they're open source, to the extent they're decentralized, it's really hard to get funding for them. So, you started getting, I think, Bitcoin was one of the first, DAO was one of the first, but you started seeing more and more people use an ICO as a way to raise money for a project that otherwise might not be able to get traditional funding, but might actually be an interesting project or infrastructure for the ecosystem. And then obviously it's basically exploded. Right now you see everyone seems to want to ICO and get on the blockchain. There are, traditional companies that, their business model doesn't even need blockchain. They're trying to ICO. Now, I think a lot of this is driven by how frothy the market is. There's a ton of money in the space, and a lot of people are just running after the money. But there still are, a lot of really good projects out there that I think are critical to, building out infrastructure of the space that, if you go to Silicon Valley today, like you may not be able to get funding for it.
So can you talk a little bit more like concretely about what actually an ICO is? So is an ICO someone implementing like cloning Bitcoin but for tokens? Tactically, concretely, what's actually going on?
So it can be a number of different things. Usually it's, either a company or a project that is going out and they're either building a DApp, which is, an application on top of a protocol, or they're actually building a protocol themselves and they are using an ICO as a means of funding it, right? So usually the way they go about this is they will write a white paper. It's kind of a high level concept paper that gives you a bit of details about how the project would be technically feasible. They will go and assemble a team, right? So you've got the founding team, you've probably got a group of advisors, and then, of course, everything else is, the money raising process. You've got to get your legal together, your marketing together. Community tends to be, or building a community tends to be really important in this space. That's how you show traction. I actually think one of the most difficult things that people don't think about enough when they are going out and launching an ICO is their token economics, right? I think over this last summer, I had an intern go and research a bunch of ICOs for me and pull together for me their token economics. And when I sat down to look at it, you literally had everything across the map, all different types of allocations, all different types of systems. It was kind of like someone, took a shot of tequila and threw a dart against a dartboard. There was no art or science to this, but basically folks are going out and they're saying, hey, we're going to release X number of tokens, and these are what the tokens will be used for. Sometimes they have some sort of utility like membership or ability to use someone's platform. They might be like pre-sold credits to a platform, something like that, right? That the possibilities are endless. But I think one of the problems today is that people are going out, they're basically, guessing on this like mini digital token economy that they're going to try and manage. And I don't think a lot of people have thought deeply about, okay, how can we make this scalable, not for a couple hundred users or a couple thousand users, but for a couple millions of users. And when you reach that point and your token economics breaks down, I think people are going to have a lot of issues.
Well, I mean, you point out it's even interesting to see that some people want inflationary economics and some people want deflationary economics. And so it doesn't even seem people are settled out about what should happen over the long term.
Oh, yeah. I mean... you see so many interesting, creative different models, right? People are burning tokens, which means like they kind of get cut out from the
They
finite
destroy
supply.
them.
Yeah, it's yeah, like I said, human beings are creative, man.
I don't know if you can speak to it, but I mean, I know last year the SEC also came out with an opinion about this notion of, tokens and coins as a security versus being used as utilities. So now you see this sort of bandied about, like things that are security tokens versus things that are utility tokens. And like, what does that mean for someone who wants to kind of participate in them in the US, but specifically about someone who would want to sort of do their own, coin offering or token offering or whatever?
Yeah, sure. So, in the early days of ICOs, there was this rampant rumor running around that it was completely unregulated, which was not the case. I think a lot of technologists who were doing ICOs just didn't know there were laws in capital raising. And so the SEC on July 27th of 2017 came out and was like, hey, you guys, actually the same old securities laws apply. So, if your ICO raise or whatever you're doing, whatever you want to call it, looks like it's a securities offering, you still have to follow the U.S. securities laws. And they've basically reiterated that position in, several statements since then. Now, I think there is this rumor running around that a utility token cannot be a security token and that they are mutually exclusive. And that is actually not the case. You can definitely have a token that is a security but has some sort of utility function. Now, in terms of where that bright line is, it's really hard to say, right? Everyone's still sitting here waiting for the SEC to clarify a little bit more on what exactly all of this means. So, anyone who's thinking about doing an ICO should definitely hire counsel and make sure that they're doing things in a compliant manner. I always say, it's not necessarily the SEC that you have to be looking out for. You also should be looking out for state regulators and the plaintiff's bar, right? Now, in terms of for investors, how this affects them, it is very possible for investors to invest in an ICO that's compliant with securities law. We have the Jobs Act, which for the first time in, basically forever, allows non-accredited, so basically not rich investors to invest in, private securities offerings. Specifically, the two regulations that allow for this are Regulation Crowdfunding and Regulation A+. So to the extent an ICO is selling their tokens, United States, and it is a regulatory exemption like the ones I mentioned. If they don't, they'd either be violating the law or they can only sell to people outside of the U.S. The SEC, their jurisdiction is really only with U.S. investors. They only care about protecting U.S. investors. Foreign investors, they don't really care about.
And then I guess just for people who may not know, the SEC is Securities and Exchange Commission?
Yes. Yeah.
And they're traditionally the people who make sure that stocks and brokerages and options and futures people all do the things they're supposed to and regulate them and investigate fraud.
Yeah. And, every state also has its own version of the SEC. So there are state securities regulators. And obviously there's the equivalent of an SEC in every other country, right? So even if you are selling to foreign investors, maybe you don't have to deal with the US SEC, but you might have to deal with the New Zealand's version of the SEC or Japan's version of the SEC. And some countries have been have come to embrace this whole ICO phenomena, and other countries have actually taken a much more drastic stance than the SEC. So, for example, China has pretty much banned ICOs.
So this is an interesting thing that you also see on the internet. Like there's this, so I happen to know, like you pointed out, that people in the US will sort of do an ICO and say, not open to US investors. And then there's this kind of belief that like, if I put some disclaimers on my page, that's kind of good enough. From a legal standpoint, does it kind of work that way? Or like if someone in New Zealand does invest because they didn't know, but that disclaimer was there, said like, don't invest if this is illegal in your country. Like, how does that work out? Like, is it the burden on the person offering the security to check?
Yes. Okay. And so that's why we have these wonderful AML KYC laws. AML is anti-money laundering. KYC is know your customer. It basically, the function of these laws is to know the identity of the investor and make sure, the identity of that, or make sure that investor isn't like on some terrorist watch list or something, or, accused of money laundering or anything like that. The identity of a citizen of, right? And so people really should be doing accurate AML KYC checks. I've definitely seen ICOs, less so nowadays, but more so in the early Wild West days, where folks were like, okay, I'm just going to like write this on my website or in this paperwork that no one's ever going to really read. And, we're still going to take U.S. investors anyway. We don't really care. Some people, will block U.S. investors out by their IP address. But then, of course, people will VPNs go and get a VPN. Yeah. It's really interesting. Last Friday on the 17th, the Massachusetts securities regulators came out and did an enforcement action against an ICO run by a citizen of Massachusetts. And apparently an investigator had gone in to the system to try to buy into the ICO, and the system purported to have AML KYC. So the investigator, put in a fake, name like Mickey Mouse or something like that. And then when they, showed a picture of their government ID, that name did not match the name that they had put in, but they still got approved 29 minutes later. And so the investigator was able to buy into the ICO. So, that was obviously an AML KYC fail.
Yeah.
See, didn't I tell you about human beings being creative?
Yeah. I want to make comments here about, I'll refrain from my commentary on other companies doing shady things, but
yeah, it wouldn't be the first time that company's done. So how does ICO, is ICO, would you consider it like there was a lot of, crowdfunding has been around forever, right? I mean, the idea of sort of Groupon evolved from people who would in person get together and form a coalition. And this actually literally happens in Japan. Maybe not so much anymore, but this is sort of the genesis of Groupon was in Japan, people, 100 people would go to a TV store and say, all 100 of us will buy a TV right now, but you have to give us a 30% discount. Like that literally happened. And so, crowdfunding has been around forever, that kind of idea. And then it really took off on the internet with, Kickstarter and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so do you see ICOs as sort of like the next evolution of crowdfunding or is it related in any way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, ICOs are one subset of crowdfunding, right? There's so many different types of crowdfunding. You can do donation-based, rewards-based, equity or debt crowdfunding. You can do token crowdfunding, which to me is basically an ICO. And you're right, crowdfunding has been around for a long time. The Statue of Liberty, you can say, was actually crowdfunded, right? So ICOs are just, I suppose, a newer, trendier way to do crowdfunding if you have a blockchain-related project or start.
So what's the connection with the? I mean, I get that an ICO kind of runs on top of the blockchain, but you could use it to crowdfund anything, right? Like if you,
I mean, technically you could. There's definitely a lot of businesses today that are like, oh, we're going to go do an ICO, right? But one of the first questions you're going to get from any sort of ICO investor is why is blockchain necessary for your business, right? And then question number 2 will be, why is tokenization necessary for your business or project? And you do have to have really good answers to both of those.
I see.
But
so how does Dogecoin answer those questions?
So Dogecoin really.
No,
But
if you have a serious answer, I mean, you can answer it. But I was more joking.
So, but I guess, I mean, if I was making anything, I don't know, cookies or a video game or whatever, couldn't I just say, you're buying, one copy of this thing whenever it's done? And
I mean, you could. I mean, I know a guy up in SF he's tokenizing parties. You have to have at least 100 tokens to come to my party. You can do it for anything, but obviously, not everything is a great idea to tokenize. And
that's why the price of GPUs has gone so high, because everyone's trying to get into this guy's party, and they just can't get in.
Yeah, but you have to also remember, like, when you do something like, put your business on the blockchain, it does also bring a lot of complexity to what you're doing. It does increase costs a lot, right, on security and things like that. So that's one thing I would caution folks about is, maybe you might be able to get some funding from this cool thing, but you better have great justification, because it's going to bring a lot more cost and complexity as well.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, yeah, I mean, I guess, how is an ICO different from me just saying, I guess the ICO is, in other words, how is an ICO different than me just saying, PayPal me $10 and I'll send you this game when it's ready, or something like that? I mean, I guess PayPal is a centralized system.
I mean, so, if I could generalize about ICOs today, a lot of them will come out and sell their tokens for a limited amount of time. And part of the reason why they do that is psychology, right? You're creating FOMO, fear of missing out. EOS is one protocol that basically did an ICO, but they did it for a year long. I think they still might be doing it, and they're basically selling like $20 million worth of tokens every day. They've raised an insane amount. But most ICOs out there are for a very short, limited amount of time. And so, they want people to flock to them really quick. And, it's supposed to be this whole limited time opportunity, as opposed to, you can buy it whenever you want.
Oh, I see. Got it.
So, Amy, before we wind up, is there anything more you want to say about, like, dispute resolution, where you think the future is, advice for people?
Yeah, so I would say, to the extent any of your listeners are involved in the crypto space, one of the next things that we're actually pushing out is a dispute resolution intake form. I get a lot of random direct messages on Twitter and emails from disgruntled people in the crypto space who, surprise, surprise, have lost money. And so they're unhappy and they're looking for help. I just wanted to find a way to aggregate all of these claims so that we might actually be able to help people. So whether it's against an ICO or whether you have a grievance against exchange or whatever, people can go to the intake form, which is sagewise.io/dispute. So that's SAGEWISE.io/dispute. and let us know what you have issues or concerns within the space, and we are trying to see if we can help. I think in order for the industry to succeed, we have to, hold people accountable and make sure they're not scamming other people. So, I would personally love to hear what's happening, what's going on in the community.
Awesome. Cool. And then what's it like to, kind of work at SageWise? You're looking for programmers. I mean, maybe we have people who are lawyers who are listening.
Yeah, are you looking for legal, aids to help you and all of that?
Oh gosh, well, we'll definitely be looking for interns. We actually do plan on hiring 2 developers in the near-term future, one back-end, one front-end. I'm also looking for a chief of staff to help me out on the business marketing overall strategy side. So yes, we're definitely hiring. And if people are just interested to follow our progress and see what happens, they can find me on all the traditional social media channels. So LinkedIn, Twitter, I'm in a lot of the Facebook crypto groups, Instagram, right? And if they want to, follow our progress for SageWise, they can join our Telegram at t.co/SageWise.
All right.
Very
awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much. I mean, this has been, we've never talked to a lawyer on the show before. So yay, congratulations, you're the first one. Or I guess, anyways, it doesn't matter. And, it's definitely an interesting and pertinent thing today. I mean, I know lots of people out there have at least, heard about cryptocurrency and wondered what smart contracts were. And so I think this is a great help to people.
Yeah, I feel like personally, there's certain things that are kind of just really hard to grasp for me. And you kind of like, I've been, on the earth long enough now that I kind of can gauge where I am in understanding something. And so, for example, like eigenvectors. So eigenvectors was a sort of really nebulous thing. I couldn't really understand it. And then it was like, okay, I could see how people were using it, but I couldn't, like, under the hood, it wasn't part of the fabric, I guess, of my consciousness. I couldn't really connect eigenvectors. I'm just choosing that kind of at random. It's like everything else I know, right? And then eventually I kind of figured it out, right? And so the same with, let's say, probability density functions or something, right? And so I feel like ICOs and blockchain, like blockchain at this point I have a pretty good idea, but ICOs and cryptocurrencies and these things, it's just, I feel like personally it's just really hard to wrap my head around kind of what is actually going on. But I think I have a much better idea now than I did an hour ago. And I feel like I'm going to wake up tomorrow with like a ton of questions. And so are probably a lot of other people. And don't hesitate to ping Amy or message on Google Plus, and I'll point Amy to our post on Google Plus and Facebook and all of that. So if you have any questions for her, she'll know where to go look for that. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. This is fascinating.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me.
The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.